in very precise, skillful ways, feeling into our own energy, emotion state and working with it to shift it into the state that will most serve us to do what we're wanting and needing to do at that moment, right? And in the process, to actually have that deeper skill to suss out what is just sort of more coming from my mind and my ego in terms of my desires and my impulses, and what versus and what will really serve where I'm at and that which I care for, my values. That I wish that, and part of my, I guess a way of talking about my core mission with this lifelong project here in the UZAZU community increasingly, is to be one that UZAZU can make a significant contribution to culture moving forward, that becomes more and more also an assumption. Mm-hmm. Oh, I can feel it, that people are just knowing that, growing up knowing that. Oh, wait a minute, let me feel into my state and shift it so that I have a better foundation to do whatever I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. Which is a more bottom-up balancing thing, right? Right now it's very top-down. Analyze, predict, and then control my body, control the world from here. It isn't serving humanity all that well.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Dano, and welcome to Unknowingly Connected, a podcast for people open and curious by nature with specific interests in the human potential and the greater good. Twice a month, I interview professionals who have gathered their diverse passions or gifts to be in service of human leadership. You will hear from their journey and their techniques, crafted to be within everyone's reach, and explained from a scientific, body, mind, and spiritual perspective. It's all connected, and we might not even know it. Hi. In today's episode, I have the pleasure to interview Dylan Newcomb. He's the founder and lead trainer of UZAZU Embodied Intelligence. He's a master coach and trainer and an avid embodiment researcher and theorist. In this episode, which we separated in two parts, we talk about Dylan's background and journey from the Julliard School of Arts in New York, the Mind-Body Research Lab he co-founded in 2001, and what is now the UZAZU approach. We also discuss about the self-assessment background and why UZAZU self-assessment is different from other assessments you may know. We also talk about how UZAZU can help from a coaching perspective, but also to work on trauma, and how UZAZU include both mind and body by also working with words. I have to say, I'm a little biased since I'm on my UZAZU certification path. And yet, I wanted to offer you the possibility to see an innovative body-mind macro model that encompasses many other personal development modalities. Whether you're an individual looking for personal development, a coach, or a therapist. Enjoy. Good morning, Dylan.
Good morning, Stephanie. Or afternoon for you, right?
Yeah, afternoon for me. So I usually start straight into the conversation.
All right.
Like people to see what is your background, because some people may know you, some people may know UZAZU or not. And we'd like to know where you're coming from, what brought you, what has been all the journey from, I think you were born in Maine, were you? In Maine in the US? Am I right?
I was born a man?
In Maine?
I was born in Maine.
Yeah.
I thought you said, I think you were born a man. Yes,
I think too.
Yes, and I've decided to mostly remain that way. Gender, yeah, that's a whole different topic. No, I was born in Concord, Massachusetts, which is just next to Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah, my parents on both sides are also from there. We moved up here in 1975. I was born in 71, so I'm 50. And we moved up in 75 to join as part of like the Back to the Land movement. So my parents were hippies. We started a commune with 15 people on it, and I lived for 15 years in a half-renovated cow barn.
Wow.
With no running water and no toilet, with tons of animals and crops.
Okay.
That was my upbringing. In a town of 200 people on a dirt road.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
With no neighbors, no post office, no school. Yeah. Not in our town. There was a school 2 towns over. I did go to school.
Okay.
So it's a very specific, environment.
Yeah.
My mom was always interested in dance. So she alternated between teaching. She started a nursery school in our barn. So during the day, we would convert it into a nursery school. My mom is just a really gifted, naturally gifted, and also studied child educator and dancer. She got really interested in West African dance.
Oh, yeah.
Caribbean dance. So I grew up, and she used to bring people up to Maine from New York City, from Boston, from the Caribbean to teach movement workshops. So I was exposed to that since I was a kid. But I was always into music. I was into singing. I was kind of a child performer, singer. And
wow.
talent shows, I'd be the little 5-year-old singing the Linda Ronstadt songs. And I got into country. I got a lot into Black gospel music, performed a lot of Black gospel music. Okay. And in the country in Maine.
Yeah.
To white farmers going, okay. Don't know what this 5-year-old's doing singing Black gospel music in Maine, but cool. They were down. And it just sort of unfolded from there. I was always interested in sound and movement and singing and dancing, and went away to school when I was 16 in performing arts high school. Just kept doing music and dance. Then I went to Julliard as a dancer, and then ended up in their music department. So I just kept going. Then I got into the Netherlands Dance Theater when I was 21, contemporary dance company in Holland. And within 2-3 years, I was composing for choreographers. So I was a dancer as more and more choreographer, and also composing for other choreographers. I'm giving sort of the boom, boom, boom tour of my life.
Sure, no, lovely. Because we have a lot to talk, so that's great.
I'll plan through this. I was also the other big thread that, in terms of sort of seeding the foundation for how I got into Uzazu, is I was really interested in meditation, really attracted to spirit. No, I wouldn't. No, not spirit. It didn't appear to me as spirituality. It appeared to me as an obsession with all things Asian, and particularly meditation and this notion of enlightenment. I was really, my parents weren't talking about, I was just like fixated on this notion from 12 years old. I was just like reading any account I could get my hands on of somebody who had had enlightenment experience. I was all over it.
Wow. So you had those 3 branches, let's say, when you were in your 20s, like meditation and dance.
20s,
and,
yes, and even from 12 years old on. I remember one thing that really struck me about reading biographies of people was that many of them had a life-threatening illness or some sort of like confrontation with death that woke them up on a certain level.
Oh yeah.
And one of my biggest disgruntled things as a teenager was not, oh, my friends don't like me, or oh, this or that. It was, my life is too easy. Like, I'm worried that my life is just too cushy, to really shock me awake.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely.
It was kind of, looking back on it now, it's kind of like a sort of soft and kind of self-awareness around my own privilege.
Yeah.
In a way. I really connected those dots into right now. That makes me a bit emotional.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have a lot to talk about. can I have 20 minutes to process this?
Yeah. Well, you can do some UZAZU for a couple of minutes.
Thank you. You can facilitate me.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
So what happened, because I know you were dancing in Netherlands, but the thing I'm missing is what made you shift from dancing to studying and getting money from the Dutch government to study. Yeah. That's the piece missing here.
I'm in my 20s, my 20 through 28, I was in the Netherlands Dance Theater. And then around 27, 28, I left and became an independent choreographer, composer. Won the three major awards in my country in the first year of my career as an independent choreographer. So I was in the news. It was very high profile for a while there. And so a lot of eyes on me, a lot of expectations, a lot of excitement about what was possible creatively, a lot of money. Because at that time I was, there was a lot of money for the arts, relatively speaking. And I was, one of the up and coming stars that people wanted to, therefore, let's give him money. And I loved it. And at the same time, I started this, now that I was in this position to really just explore my curiosity, I realized I didn't realize, but it naturally led me towards personal development. And over the next 3 years, I sort of had the incrementally dawning realization that I was actually more in it for the personal development than I was for the art.
Yeah.
The objet d'art, it was more a means to the end of personal growth for me. Personal, individual, and collective growth. So my research, I started getting more and more focused on the research process. Let's just take these dancers, instead of trying to put steps together so we can get them on stage and fill the music. It was more let's learn about this. Let's investigate what happens when we do this. And the dancers loved it. But then we'd all get very stressed as the premiere date came, because we didn't have steps. It's shit, we actually put something on stage here. So, then I started actually just say, okay, now I'm just going to do a research project and I don't need to have a performance. And then that went so well, or I loved it so much. I was like, I'm going to just start a research institute for other choreographers like me, who don't want to always have that pressure of it. And so we got a bunch of funding together. 5 of us, we started. And we just got a lot of research grants to just indulge ourselves. And that's still going on today, 20 years later. We set it up in a way that it's a group of choreographers that then pass it on to the next generation.
Lovely.
It's changed forms in certain ways since then, but we called it Dance Lab back then.
And what was the study, the main study, or the main research you've done there?
So I needed a concrete place to begin. What I was interested in was I had these threads in my life. I had sound and the power of sound and music, and I had the power of movement, both looking at it, but more the doing of it, and consciousness. So I had gotten into the thing I was talking about, meditation. I got into Vipassana meditation, which is a form of Buddhism called insight meditation, a fairly sort of stripped down, bare bones, mindfulness training.
Yeah.
To simplify it. And so I had been doing that, depending on the period, 2 to 3 hours a day for almost 10 years now. And it had sort of got me to a place where I was tripping out. Yeah. I didn't know if this was real or not real, if I was that, if I was not that, if I should be indulging in the pleasures and the grittiness of that, or just sort of let it float and become more and more spacious. And how did that play out in my life? My sex life was just I could hardly have sex anymore by the time I was 27 or 20. It was just too trippy for me. So I was at an impasse developmentally for myself. I felt like these, for various reasons. So anyway, how does sound, movement, and consciousness come together? I thought, well, just studying the voice again, back to where I started with all that when I was young. And what if I had just people make sound, say we started with sentences and the very first sentence we analyzed was in Italian, io non mi sento.
Yep.
I don't feel myself, which is very ironic in the grand scheme of things. And it just sort of popped out from one of my dancers. She was like researching that, and that became our focus. And so we're like, okay, as you make a vowel, you're making a sound, but it's also a movement. It also then starts to activate a certain state in the body, and that state starts to lead into certain just ways of behaving and interacting with the space and potentially with other movers or dancers, people in the space in our research context. I just got really interested in that. So the grant was to study the effect of vowel sounds, vowels and consonants. The first one was vowels and consonants, then I came to specialize in vowels. Vowels and consonants, their effect on thought, emotion, and behavior. So we would have people come into the studio, close their eyes or be blindfolded, and just play around with different vowels and consonants, both abstracted and in the context of like a word or a sentence. And then just move with it and see how it made them move, how they felt, and just took lots of notes and did this with like over 200 people and noticed over time real consistent trends of when you started to get a feel for what types of people gravitated towards which types of sounds and states. So, you know, some people you give them ahs and they're like, and they sort of go, I like this, you know, the more open, gregarious, extroverted people.
Yeah.
And then for just to pick two of these 40 vowel sounds that came to be, you know, UZAZU is ooh. We noticed that people would get much more quiet, much more introverted, much more, a little bit more serious. The ow is more playful.
Yeah.
Ooh, now, I didn't like...
Sure, I understand.
Siri's not sure she understands what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter, Siri. I'll train you later for free.
I don't want to buy Siri. I'll train you later for free on me.
We'll talk about it.
So the vowels were
when I first did ooh and explored that, I just felt contained and like a little trapped and like this is serious and this is fear-based contraction and that's expansive. That's love and light, and that's like when there's harmony and peace in the world, and that's so I kind of had a bad to good framework for myself.
Yeah.
Seeing other people embody these different states, I saw, the people that are naturally more grounded and more responsible and more like not as ADHD as me, are naturally appreciating that. Oh, wait a minute. What is this inviting me to consider about the growth opportunities here? And that was like a pivotal aha for me. Like, there is a larger context here, a larger spectrum of states. I am inherently subjective in my experience of these states. And so naturally, I, like everyone else, am going to have my biases, my proclivities, my unconscious judgments. And that anchored in me, it sort of shifted me both gradually and with some ahas into this mode of researcher, where I became more interested than my artist self of self-expression. Like, I want to make a dance about how I don't like ooh and I like ah. Like I was no longer interested in my own version, my own biases. I was like, no, wait a minute. I really want to understand this and how an understanding of all these different states and the opportunity of them and our sort of abreactions to them, how understanding that can be of service to the world.
Absolutely. So it reminds me of a few things. The first thing is that in the coaching world I'm coming from, we talk about range. So even if we have a certain way of being, we learn to have a different range to adapt ourselves to the need of the client. So
as a facilitator.
As a facilitator, yes, as a coach. and which includes, of course, the voice as well. That the way I speak and the speed and so on would have an effect on you, of course, or or my client. But the second thing, which led me to UZAZU itself, is that every time you explain some of your research, I can see how other modalities can go into the UZAZU frame. So when you were talking about the vowels, the oo we're doing is really similar to what Peter Levine talked in somatic experiencing, which is the voo. I don't know if you heard about this one. When people feel like the fight, flight, freeze response, it would ask people to do this voo, which is just a V on top of the oo that we're doing to sensing.
Right. Yeah.
And another thing that I think it was in episode 2. So I've been studying also with Jeannie Whiteland's and leadership, but other people talk about it, about the chakras and the vowels which are associated to different places. So to me, that made me really think that the sound and the vowels are really something that has an impact on the body, on the way of being, on the range we have, or a dynamic when we converse together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Lovely.
So,
Thank you for reminding me of that VU thing. I read that a number of years ago when I was reading one of his books, and I was like, cool.
There you go.
I'd forgotten about that. One question I often get about the vowel research is, did you look at the healing sounds of Qigong? Did you look at the vowel sounds of, from the Indian chakra system? Did you look at Rudolf Steiner's work with eurythmy? My daughter goes to a Waldorf school.
Oh, yeah.
No, I did not at first, but then I did. It was really important to me to not front load the research with any existing, because then you're just like looking for confirmation or denial of something specific. And I wanted to start with a blank slate. So I purposely didn't even let myself look at it for years. And I just was like, no, I'm going to let the data of humans, and when you don't front load them at all, what naturally happens are their patterns.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say, so I have to be honest and say, like, I'm in I led the UZAZU research. I'm partial to it, to the value of this seems to be what people naturally do, just based on our research. However, can we take a system, and there are certain overlaps. We can make connections to, that makes sense here. And there's also plenty of things where I can sort of say, based on my research, yeah, cool, I can imagine that can work. That's not what, in my experience, people naturally do of their own accord. It's not just like nature.
Yeah.
But that's part of the beauty and the amazingness of the mind-body connection and culture, right? Is we can invent things sort of like tools, right? Like a vowel sound or any sort of concept and vowel sound and action can be a tool. We can say, I'm going to say this and use this in this way to cultivate this response. And that can absolutely work.
Yeah.
So there's this interplay between, on one hand, studying the body mind system from the inside out and saying, what are the natural principles of nature through an embodiment lens? And how can we design our methods and our tools sort of as indigenously as possible from the body? So we're working with the nature of the system.
Yeah.
And at the same time, and we can go out here and we can be creative and we can sort of mastermind or intuit things and apply it back to the body. There's just endless space for ongoing research and innovation in this space, as in with any space. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
No, absolutely. And also what I've learned in UZAZU is, because some vowels are associated to some posture, is some vowels are vowels we don't culturally practice, right? Some are just like more like Asian, or the U, which is like typical French, actually. Yes. That it's also, there's some sound we don't practice, and yet when we do it, and in UZAZU, it makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
So the quick shtick on that is we looked at about 40 different vowel sounds. It was in the Netherlands, so we had lots of different languages in the studio, which is really important if you're studying these kind of things.
Yeah.
What emerged, and it really took like 15 years, so I'm really fast forwarding here, is a more principled understanding. First, you just start with the grounded research of what does that do? What effects does all these different things have? But then you can start to distill first principles out of that, sort of reverse engineer it. And what we came to is basically we rediscovered what the phoneticians do, which is they talk about the vowel space can be articulated by openness of the mouth, backness or frontness of the tongue, and the narrowness or roundedness and unroundedness of the lips. And with those three parameters, you can really describe at a fundamental level all of the vowels. And the basic discovery that really was a slow motion aha, like a 15-year long was was that all and a aha duh was that's sort of the if I was to describe the arc of my 15 years of research, it's aha duh. Is that it's all just a fractal of everything else. That the movement of back and front and open and close and wide and narrow that shape the vowels, that shape the raw ingredients of how we communicate, is just a fractal, meaning a small self-similar version of how we move both internally, energetically, and physically in our world. Just like the eyes are a window to somebody's health, you can study the iris, you can study the ears and the pressure points, you can study the feet. The mouth is the same. It's another way in that has its own unique advantages and its own unique limitations. So while what started with the vowel sounds really became a study of space and embodied consciousness within space, but just that recognizing the richness of the sort of macro level space and all those micro level spaces. So the vowels have shifted from a sort of a primary focus of inquiry to just one facet of what we work with in UZAZU, right? Like very often I'll have 3 coaching sessions with a new client and not even bring up vowels. Like they're something that can be really helpful, but they can also make people really self-conscious, for example.
Oh, yes. Oh, boy,
right?
yes.
Some people, it's a great window in, and for other people, it's just not helpful.
A bit too much. Yeah, definitely. So as we've been discussing, maybe it would be interesting, as I told you, if you can explain UZAZU to my mother-in-law. In a simple way, in a nutshell, so everyone can understand, and then we can keep going on. On the modalities. So
just to put it in the context of how this conversation has been unfolding, what started with where does sound, movement, and consciousness come together? How can we use vowel sounds as a window in to start exploring that? These were just my initial way in to what I discovered over the next the initial 3 years was a study of states. It's just a way could be seen as just a way to start to get into a certain state.
Yeah.
But has a different state. What do I mean when I say state? In UZAZU, we take a very broad, inclusive definition of state. So it's kind of a fuzzy construct, if you will. When I say state, I mean at the foundational level, your physiology, your sympathetic nervous system, your upregulation, your parasympathetic, your downregulation, and the cocktail of how much activation you have going on there. So your physiological arousal level and self-regulation. Your emotions are in that space. Right. So I could be high energy with a bit of frustration. I could be high energy with excitement, collaborative, sort of engaged excitement. I could be low energy, sort of depressed and disempowered. All of these are different states that go hand in hand with thought patterns, right? When I'm in that state, I tend to have these type of thoughts. And then that gets into a vicious loop. And then those thoughts reinforce or exacerbate the state that I'm in. If I feel warm, fuzzy, and connected and attuned to you, that I tend to have more warm, carry attuned thoughts, and which reinforce that state. right? But if I have like programming from my past where I've come to the belief net that I've created, largely unconsciously, is I can't trust people. People will let you down. People don't have your best interests at heart. I might go into be drawn in, by your, warm demeanor and our friendship into that state. But then it can collide, right, against my unconscious belief net and go, yeah, but Dylan, you can't trust her. Right. And then I'm looking for evidence in you of why I should really get out of this state soon.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, thoughts, depending on how you look at it, your thoughts and unconscious belief net and perceptual sense-making filters interact very quickly and iteratively with your physiological and emotional state and the behavior. So Uzazu, it's a study of embodied states, and it's also really a study of how those interact with our internal thought and perceptual processes, and how that then plays out in our behavior.
So to put into comparison, because Uzazu, we can talk about it, has a self-assessment. Yeah. Most self-assessment wouldn't, for the ones I know, wouldn't be as dynamic as Uzazu. It would mostly say, these are your qualities, or your not really good qualities, or this is your personality, and that's it. So it's fairly fixed.
I am a this, I am a that. You get a type out of it.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about on the practical level, because it might be to some people a really big picture, maybe too big as for now.
Yeah.
As Uzazu as a self-assessment, how it can help them understand and then maybe change certain patterns. So how it goes with Uzazu.
So one thing here, and just touch on it very briefly, is the whole nature versus nurture issue. Personality systems, which became really in vogue starting in around with, William James in the late 1900s, like 1880 and whatnot. And then, Raymond Cattell with his 16PF system, personality factors system, and then got into Myers-Briggs and other, it was all the rage in psychology, personality theory and understand personality types. The underlying assumption that was only partly self-aware was that, as Popeye said, I am who I am, Olive. I can't help it. I'm just this way. You're going to have to deal with me. Learn to love me, and that was kind of the view of let's at least understand Popeye as a personality type so we can, learn to get along with his Popeye-ness a little bit easier. And then, we have this sort of adage, people don't change, at the end we don't change. Well, we're discovering that actually we do change. We've discovered that we do change. And with the whole advent of social sciences and cultural studies, we've learned just how enculturated we are and how much a product of our environment and our nurturing we are. If you look at the last 50 years of the social sciences and the soft sciences, the most significant contribution is two things. Just how much a product of our culture and our socioeconomic situation and our, our whole cultural history is shaping us. And the intergenerationalness of that. And how that collides with our own sort of how we came through. Like any parent knows, you raise your kids kind of the same way, but gosh, they're different.
Oh boy, yeah.
Right? I grew up with two twins, in my inner circle of friends growing up, and they were so different, and they, twins. So there's an absolute both and of our own unique tendencies and patterns. But so much of it is shaped by culture, by just how our attachment, which way our attachment patterning went, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, what embodiment does is when I say embodiment, when understanding the sort of under the hood of how is my system, Popeye's, mind body awareness system, doing what it's doing? Like when I'm that way, when I'm acting like, those Dylanisms again, like we can start to really understand the mechanics of that, can't we? Like, well, that's a specific flow of attention and energy and, neurons firing and wiring together in specific pathways. That's not the only option that our system has. That's the option, that's the path through the forest of being that are the most traveled.
Yeah.
We can become aware of them, and we can start to find other routes through the forest. And they're a little awkward at first and a little bit tenuous. But as we know, neurons that wire together, fire together, the more we use them, the more our system starts to recognize, I can do it this way. I can soften back and listen instead of push my point through. Or I can soften and lean in again and be curious about your experience when you say you're not happy about something with me, instead of whatever it is.
Yeah. So
right, learn these new ways. And so UZAZU is evolving more and more to be a way of making sense of our patterning, our state patterning, in very much in a lens, in a way that simultaneously gives us an understanding of how we're doing what we're doing. So it's not just like, I'm a feeler, I'm a thinker, I'm neurotic, but like, moi je fais ça et pas ça. I tend to, these are my habits of being.
Yeah.
And then what might serve me more, and how do I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the basic, right? We talk about in embodiment, which is awareness of what I do, and be able to practice something different. So you have the choice. So many times I know now I use more and more UZAZU, and along with my other modalities, I say to people, it's not about changing you. It's about being aware of different choices that are available in you, and maybe practice it because you haven't been able to practice it maybe ever, or you had very little space for that. So you have choice when to interact with your environment and with yourself, maybe differently and more efficiently or more in balance than what you used to do. So it actually rejoices what you say. It's like what I usually say is like, it's never too late. It's just a matter of practice. So some people say like, I'm like that, or recently I have people who knows about the theory, they would say like, I have this type of attachment. I'm like, great. Lovely to know. And yet we can practice something different. Yes. So you can be more in balance and not having the same response, which are kind of knee-jerk reactions you have all the time.
Yes, exactly. So a few thoughts that brings up. Mm-hmm. For me, and because I divide my time between, I'd say currently 60% training other coaches and therapists in UZAZU, and maybe 40% seeing private clients. It's about my balance these days. And I really want to keep my private client practice because, for many obvious reasons, the synergy is really important and good. I get a lot of people who are a little bit further along. They tend to be like 45 to 65. They've done a lot of personal development. They understand them. This is by and large, there's exceptions to this, but they understand themselves really pretty well. They've read a lot of books. They've done a lot of workshops. They've gone through therapy. They've maybe gotten a certain amount of work done, and but they're still like, I still pull back when this happens, or I still push in that situation. And they're like almost at the edge of their hope that that in this lifetime that will change. They're trying to make peace with it on one hand, but they're also like, God, I feel like there's a way, but I can't. I thought this would work. I thought that would work. Embodiment feels in a way for many like the new frontier / the final frontier of change work, where it's like, so let me zoom out from their perspective. Say, from my perspective, I see it like when I look at that general sort of arc, and I hear them say, but I worked on this, but I understand this, but why isn't it changing? My default assumption is, well, it hasn't been deeply enough that process hasn't been deeply embodied enough. And there's two facets to that. Yes, a lot of awareness, but there's awareness, sort of cognitive understanding awareness. And then there's awareness of the general felt sense of it, like, and that's the important first awareness. Oh, that my stomach, that here. And then there's and that's foundational, but then there's the next awareness of a functional awareness, not just sort of qualitative global awareness of, oh yeah, I do feel awkward in my belly, but like feeling how your body-mind awareness system is doing what it's doing. Like, oh, I see and I feel now when I go into my anxious attachment pattern and I do that. And it's not until you really gain a functional awareness of how you're doing that state, not just where do you feel that in your body, which is an important first step. But I need to know, and I need to train. So Dylan, have learned that I really need to train people to first be a student of their imbalances, to really understand how you're doing those less skillful / pleasant behaviors. And then what is the shift into a more functional, balanced state? Just like we do with posture. We have to recognize, oh, I'm slouching again, boom. Oh, I'm doing this again, boom. Right? And then we have to stay focused on it until it becomes natural for us to have a different posture. Yeah. And that's what the understanding we've evolved to over the years with UZAZU. It's like, understand your habits of embodied functioning. A lot of people they want to skip that step because it's not necessarily pleasant. It's like, no, I just want to get to feeling good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I understand that. And I feel, a bit of compassion for them. But I have to hold them with just enough compassion to like get them through and let's do it. Let's lean into it. Right? Because we have to understand this better first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not just sit here and talk about it.
So that leads me to, as you know, I work also as a compassionate inquiry practitioner, which is Gabor Mate's approach around trauma. And I know also, within, if I can say that, the UZAZU team, you also have Deb, who works as a therapist. And so there's a really great, because when we talk about trauma and more nowadays, so I would like to give a little moment around the connection of UZAZU and trauma, because we can look at it on a more, I wouldn't say superficial level. Let's say oh, I do this, it doesn't sound nice, and then I change and it becomes better. But we can also work on trauma within the frame of UZAZU. So one thing I've learned that we do, I'm not going to talk about compassionate inquiry too much, but the thing is, what we usually do is connect the conversation with the body, the sensation, to go back to childhood, to when was the first time you had this sensation. So it's not about only talking, but more about this itching sensation associated to an emotion. And then we go back to childhood, to when was the first time. And we try to hold space for the client to feel it deeply and then can release the emotion. However, what I notice is, and I've talked about it with Gabor, that some of my clients, and in some clients, for some clients, you need to rebalance them and give them new tools to be able to go to the trauma, the deep situation of the trauma. So they have new tools, and they know there's how do you say that? There's a way out to it.
Yeah.
Because some people will be like, I'm ready, I want to fix it, I want to go there. And then you lead them to the deep hole, and then they just have this reaction, can be a little bit of hopelessness, I would say. So why I'm saying that is because in UZAZU, you have all this, what we call balanced state, but we can see the underactivated and overactivated state in each quadrant. So just before we go there, would you like me to talk about the quadrants, or do you want to talk about the quadrants?
I have one or two just responses to this potent theme you just brought up.
Yeah, sure.
So there is, I'm so happy that trauma is really getting the attention it deserves and needs.
Yeah.
Like it's really coming into our collective view much more, and that is such a relief.
Yeah.
And as with anything that comes into view and sort of like cultural trending, is we can, I mean, you can't emphasize the importance of trauma enough. So absolutely that. Sure. Yeah. But we can with any one of these things, just like when personal development got all into brainwaves, then, you know, we can sort of over attribute, if I just align my brainwaves, then everything will be great. Or if I just clear my trauma, then like everything is just going to naturally happen for me. Right. And that, and I'm not saying Gabor is saying that, but
no.
We all want that magic bullet, right? That if I just XYZ.
Yeah. And by the way, just to let you know, that's mostly, I mean, from my point of view, my own perspective, that's what people usually come from. I mean, when they contact me, and I'm sure my colleagues as well, they're like, I know I have a trauma, I want to fix it. That's a little bit the idea of the client. That's what I would say.
And that's highly preferable to me than can you prescribe me something for my experience of XYZ?
Sure. Yeah.
Is there a pill for this? Like that's way more functional.
Yeah.
So evolutionarily, that's like super important and significant. So quickly for now, because I know we have other topics we want to get onto. Over the years, one of the threads that I've been very engaged with that we've not yet mentioned is developmental stage theory, theories of stages of growth and development. I've been particularly influenced by the Piaget, into Jane Loevinger, into Suzanne Cook-Reuter, into Terry O'Fallon's work, which is the general school of constructivist stages of development, meaning stages that build on the stages before. Oh, I'm working out how to do this, like the baby. I'm working out how to like calm down once I cry. And, you know, so my mother sort of holds me in the beginning, then I work out how to basically regulate my emotions. Now I'm stepping in, now I'm 6, 7, 8, I'm stepping into, wait a minute, what do I want and how can I get it? Right. And I need to like flex those muscles and really like be in that space of learning how to listen to my feelings and figure out how to get what I want for a few years. And then how to battle with my parents to, you know, when to give in to my parents and when to push on. Yeah. And then we develop, and then that, of course, each of those stages of development can incur traumas, right? As I was trying to assert myself, my dad got mad at me. And now every time I try to assert myself, that trauma gets, you know, incrementally triggered. So when we look at it like that, we can start to see how our trauma plate of different, you know, stuff that we have unresolved is really embedded in the stage of development that we were in when that happened.
Yeah.
And the type of context of that trauma, was it a sexual trauma? Was it a this trauma? Was it a that trauma, or a combination of things? How did that interrupt what we were working on acquiring, the ways of functioning and being that we were working on acquiring when that happened? Because not only do we have to clear the trauma, but we have to sort of make up that developmental handicap, some people call it, that incurred. I wasn't able, what ways of being was I not able to fully develop that my other more sophisticated aspects of self sort of ultimately need to rely on as foundational skills.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a resourcing, a rebuilding that is in terms of not just lessening the load of the trauma stress, but of stepping into and reclaiming more of our potential. That embodiment, there's like a really key piece for embodiment, right? It's not just the healing, but the growth.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just reminds me an example I have of a client. So just to explain how beneficial can be UZAZU and how it can encompass different methods. Is and regarding to trauma, I sometimes have clients for some reason who have done maybe a lot of meditation or breath work. So they've done embodiment. They do have embodiment tools, and they've done some therapy. So it's like either or. So they use the body or they've used the mind to try to find out what happened or what are the trauma. However, using UZAZU, sometimes what I notice is you can bring the mind and the body together. So without having someone saying, like, this happened to me, and then I do some breathing or whatever, like really separated the two, you can do certain postures and ask questions, and it amplifies the memory of the body mind, so we can work from there.
Right.
And it has happened. I mean, I'm sure, as you said, like you had clients who've been working on themselves a lot and then they're desperate. But the fact to put the two together, the mind and body, is I think it's the next step, I would say, into into what we do, right?
Yeah. It's easy to think of, building on our conversation, it's easy to think of like, I'm gonna heal, I need to heal, and then I can grow. Right? Once I heal this stuff, then I can start skill building and whatnot. But this is in the way of this. So we got to do this first, then we'll do this. And that's not entirely wrong. I don't entirely disagree with it. And especially in extreme cases, there is a sort of base level that we need to be able to focus on this in any sort of a productive way, right? So we need to, or at least be able to enter a well enough regulated state that we can do growth work. It's hard to do growth work from almost impossible from a very dysregulated state.
Yeah.
But what we find, and this circles back on points both of us were alluding to before, I think, what we find in UZAZU is that this is like all polarities. There's a synergy opportunity here. There's a yin and yang synergy that is available to us here. We're in the light of what kind of growth will empower me to do the next level of healing.
Absolutely.
And one key word that we love is resourcing. How do you spell that? I don't know how to spell it. Resourcing is we work increasingly now. If I look at how I've handled and worked with people with trauma over the years, I used to more like zero in right away on a trauma and sort of be in that kind of, let's heal this first and then we'll, elaborate. Now I tend to delay more and more really going in to the heart of the trauma that we feel and going, what a little awareness building can we do? What resources do they have? And more UZAZU gives us a model for understanding each of these modes are like resources, and how depending on the nature of the trauma, what kind of positive regulated, various types of positive regulated states will serve this person to be able to access more and more at will, so that they can then go into that trauma from a place of empoweredness and choice, right? So they have the trauma rather than the trauma has them. Yeah. And then they have that knowing, that inner knowing that we're just dipping in here and I can always go back to this self-compassionate place. I know how to embody self-compassion and not just think I need to be kind to myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in other words, iterativeness is our friend. It also just helps us sort of get on with our life while we're still doing the ongoing journey of healing.
Yeah, no, definitely.
A lot of people feel like, shit, I got to really take 3 years out of life and heal this and then get back into life. And yes, to a degree, maybe, dial down your plans a little bit. Maybe it's too ambitious for the type of healing you need to do for a certain period of months. But by and large, I feel like if you're taking this approach, you can much more sort of stay engaged in your life and keep, improving
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's also very much a kind of a coaching therapy synergy that we're talking about here.
Yeah, definitely. And actually it reminds me of, that's also what we do in Compassionate Inquiry is sometimes people will like want to go like, yeah, when I was like 4 years old, this happened. And the entry point most of the time is what triggered you last week, because what triggered you, the trigger is come from usually trauma, or your perception of life and your perception of people and your environment comes from there. So it's not necessarily needed to go really back, just by working on your triggers, which actually helps you to function better with people and in your life on a daily basis. So you can do like deep work, and also like, just be more fluent,
that brings me, Stephanie,
flexible.
to, I think there's an important distinction to be made between unresolved energy.
Yeah.
That is, just very akin to like, needing a bowel movement, like,
Yeah.
like I need to like feel that, breathe through that, dissolve that, disperse that, and maladaptive behaviors. Meaning coping responses, like that served you in the moment, that were brilliant when you were 3, as given your resources the best you could do.
Absolutely.
Like I'm just gonna do that, or I'm gonna dissociate.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm being abused, right? Those were adaptive at the time, but in light of your adult self, we could call them maladaptive, not serving you. And those are very related, but they're distinct, and they can often just sort of be glomped together.
Yeah.
And so that's I think a very helpful thing to consider in this synergy of growth, is that part of what we're doing is we're not just taking that moment to like find it, focus on it, breathe through it, dispel it, which is key.
Yeah.
But the other missing piece there is really, this goes back to what I was saying, training people to understand, like for me, it was anxious attachment. So the minute I felt like we were not well connected, I would go, let's secure that connection. Let's keep it. I'm gonna tune with you. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about it. I didn't know that I was doing that. I was inside that adaption. And I needed to train myself that I could be here and that this was safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. So compared to, again, just because you were mentioning it, what we call in Compassionate Inquiry, we call it the maladaptation. We call it the stupid friend.
The stupid friend?
Yeah. So basically, it's like it has been helpful for a while, but maybe when you're 40 or 50, it's maybe about time to, it has helped you. To say goodbye or farewell for a while. And the thing that is also, I find it really efficient, is that in different modalities, so compassionate inquiry and maybe an IFS, internal family system, they would say that you will find the answer of balanced adaptation, let's say, through self with a capital S, or essence, that we all have inside. And yet, talking like down to earth, it's really helpful to have a certain embodiment and feeling on how it can be instead of, I wouldn't say instead of trusting self, yet I think sometimes it might be hard for some clients to replace maladaptation with something they haven't been practicing. Even though they have it inside, they might have it like, if we consider a person as a whole, might have it inside and yet it might not be that accessible, even though you understand you have a maladaptation. It's like, okay, I'm not doing it like in a balanced way. So as you say, maybe like an anxious attachment, but yet how can I do it differently? Now I understand that. How can I do it differently? That's what I find really interesting in
yes.
UZAZU.
So that's a good intro into the different states of UZAZU. So
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Don't forget to click on part 2, where I talked with Dylan around a very specific example on how can UZAZU look like on a facilitation session, whether somatically or with words. We also talk about the window of tolerance, underactivation of states, overactivation. So basically, how UZAZU embrace therapy as well as coaching. Enjoy and see you soon.